those of you just joining us now and missed the wonderful technical problems with the first intro number 2 is even better. Welcome back to Wood, Air, and Metal podcast. We took a week off because our guitar brains were melted that past week with all the information in the guitar world coming out, so we needed time to process and think. I am Adam Keeler, the classical guy. Mostly, I'm on steel string today. And Tim Mirth across the Ethernet on that one.
Yeah.
Is that your Eastman?
This is the Eastman, yeah.
The Eastman, yes. Did you cut the string ends off yet?
No, I haven't.
All right. It wouldn't be a day that ended in Y if you didn't. So anyways.
Those are expensive string ends.
They are. You know, hey, you never know if you could use them again. I bet you if we could figure out a way to do that, everybody would do it. It would be the next.
Part of it is these are the ones that when you cut them, they're going to hurt. Like,
oh yeah,
you can't cut them close enough, and they're too expensive for me to do the little like break off trick. Yeah. So I'd have to cut them, and then I'm like, well, then it's like a weapon.
Yeah, it is. It's like I just tried to move my hand here.
How many times have your kids cut their hands on your guitars?
Actually, none.
Really? Oh, it happens all the time.
I keep mine in my cases mostly because none of them.
I say all the time. I mean, it's happened like a few times.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
I mean, most of my guitars, like a lot of them, you can't really get to the ends of them too. So.
Well, plus you have mostly electric and mine are mostly acoustic, so yeah. I'm a little bit more leery about kids knocking one over. You know, the electric guitar can get beat to hell and be generally all right, but like my acoustic, if it falls over, it's like, well, that's done. That's just.
How do you know? Have you tried?
Yeah, I have, and it's not good. It's not good at all.
You don't like the little like clicky sound from the top, like cracked? The rattle sound.
The sound of infinite sound.
I heard that's like authentic Baroque music.
Wah, wah, wah. Nicely done. Baroque. That is, you can tell Tim's a father with that one. The dad joke comes right out. Oh, man.
It's El Natural, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we have some interesting topics that we've intentionally stopped ourselves from getting into the messenger debate type of thing. Where we're just like
I had to yell at Adam, and then Adam had to yell at me, and then I had to yell at me. So it was good.
Exactly. Don't talk about. Save it for the podcast.
Tim, stop it. Yeah.
Save it for the ring. So, anyways, this is about authoritarian guitar lessons, or maybe authoritarian teaching style ish. And I'm totally using that term hyperbolically and pushing it to the nth degree. But I think it's a good way to kind of look at it. Basically, we saw this Facebook posty thing that has a teaching experience. We'll leave the teacher out of this and so on. But basically, the kid was inquisiting to be like, why do we have to work with things in a certain way? Why the treble clef? Why chord symbols? Why this? Why that? And the teacher's response was debated, to say the least, in the thread. And we're going to do that right now and talk about it. So... You know, and the teacher in this particular quote, when he was talking about the whys, like when he said that when he had a kid ask these particular questions, it usually means that it's the end of this particular kid's
the relationship.
Yeah, the end of the relationship with music and so on.
It's just a matter of time before they're going to quit or not come anymore or whatever. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And I, reading the... Should I just read the full quote? Like,
why not?
I mean, it's tough to contextualize without, like, I'm trying to be vague, but at the same time, I can't be vague with the thing.
How about I try to say it, and then if it needs more explanation, then we'll just read it. So, I guess I'm going to paraphrase, and I'm not looking at it. I'm kind of going off of memory, which my memory sucks. So we'll see how this goes.
You're improvise.
I'm going to improvise. The gist here is this is a, let's say professional teacher that produces high quality students, and it has high expectations of their students, right? But it's not from a college perspective. This is pre-college mostly. Mm-hmm. So you have a teenager who's, by the accounts I think even written there, a pretty good musician as a teenager. You know, can play some stuff, knows how to sing and play apparently too. And, you know, kind of beyond just that first it's not like a total beginner who's never learned how to play at all, you know. And this teacher has a pretty regimented way of doing things. Like, you will learn treble clef, and you will learn these songs, and you will learn this and that kind of thing in some sort of order, with the expectation that, you know, you do all these things to a certain point, and then I'm gonna get you here, but you got to do what I say, and I'll get you to this place. Which is all good. I think we can all relate to that sort of thought process. You know, you want, if as a teacher, you want to get somebody to a certain point, and it's great if you have experience in getting people to that level and you know what it takes to get there. However, this student, who is a teenager, 16 years old, I think,
Yep.
basically said, why do I have to learn treble clef, and why do I have to learn theory, and why do I have to learn all this kind of things? Like, why do I have to do this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, why are you making me do this, sort of. So the teacher's response, at least in this thread, I don't know what he said to the student, but was, you know, as soon as somebody says that, like, I know it's just a matter of time before it's the end, you know, and they'll go off just making whatever music, and they're never gonna ascend, kind of thing. Was the sort of, because they're questioning the idea. So I guess that's the main gist, I think, of the post.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah, you're right on that one. And the teacher just kind of sums up with being like, the way I look at it is just like, I think the teacher is interpreting the students' questioning of those as to they just don't want to do work. Like, do any of us really have to do things we actually don't want to do?
Yeah,
and
it says something like that, right? Yeah,
that's a quote.
Okay.
That's a quote, but that's a very general statement.
Yeah, like, basically, have you ever been able to get anything good at anything without doing a few things you don't like doing? Right?
Exactly.
It takes doing some hard things.
So I think, like, my takedown of that, like, that statement itself is like, well, I completely agree with that. Are you there? Okay.
Now I'm back. All right.
Now you're back. All right. So
I think I lost you when you said, I completely agree with that. So we're cutting back in right now, folks. We had technical difficulties again.
Yeah, the internet was doing its thing, or not doing its thing in that regard. But the point that I was making is, I agree with the statement of, like, do we really want to do any of us have to do the things we actually do not want to do? And the fundamental thing is, well, welcome to Humanity 101. You are going to do things that you don't want to do. That's it. You know, we sit in the luxury of obscene convenience, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but the outflow of that is just, I don't think that when things are taking up leisurely, the idea of working to get to a particular spot gets annoying because, well, not like it's like a post-consumer society or anything. I'm leaving that out of the picture, but I just think that there isn't enough put out there that these guys that are at a particular level in music consistently work. And that's something that I tell my students, like, right out the gate. I'm like, the biggest illusion that is sold to people is that people walk on stage without any prep work behind it. Like, you think that, like, even pop stars, you know, to a degree, as much as I tell students, I'm like, as much as I argue that pop music is generally simple, which it is in one regard, it does not mean that those people performing it or doing it don't work at it constantly to keep it polished. That's the thing that makes it respectable, is that it's consistently worked at. And
it reminds me of, you ever watch Ink Master?
No, I haven't yet.
Do you know what that is? About
I know
the tattoo show. So they're always like, where's your references? Like, you're not using references for your drawings? Like, what the hell? Why would you not use that's another illusion with drawing, is people think, oh, they just they can just draw, like, a perfect face or whatever out of memory, and perfect, like, elephant or something out of memory. But people don't do that. They use references.
Yeah.
They had to, like, build it up on something,
Mm-hmm.
the same idea, in a lot of
Same
ways.
idea. It's anybody that's in some form of artwork that has a high level to it is consistently working on different. I mean, like literally before this podcast, I was watching a video on doing crab walking on the guitar for flexibility and position shifting. Like in the sense, it was a classical exercise of.
I'm gonna write you some etudes, Adam.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just watching the video by this classical guitarist. She was just explaining it's a great exercise. I'm going to give it a shot because I've seen this approach on a couple of different players that were really, really good, where they would shrink and expand versus shift, which is interesting. So I got to dive more into it to get more thoughts on it. But it's just like, oh, okay, they had the PDF, so I grabbed it and I'll give it a shot and see what happens. But anyways, so the guy is saying like, you're going to have to do things that you don't want to do to get to a certain point, which as somebody that teaches all the time, that comes out of my mouth all the time, like consistent. It's like, well, yeah, I know you don't want to have to do this, but that's the only way you're going to get better. That literally you're going to have to figure this thing out. And I use that as more as an encouraging tool to get people to break through it. I don't use that as a breaking point to be like, oh, well, forget it. You're useless and I'm not going to bother to teach you anything else, which is kind of the vibe that I was getting from what he was putting out there, especially since in the context he was talking about like simple chord stuff and so on. And the kid's like, well, why do I have to learn music and why do I have to that? And it is kind of funny because I had a student that was in the same mode of things. And they were at a collegiate level and they're like, I just so used to reading tabs. This is really slowing me down. And I'm like, well, you have to at least get some form. And now, granted, this is college, so I have to push them for some type of standard. Everybody has to learn this for the first semester of guitar. Like you got to read in the first position. Doesn't matter if you had tons of experience or none. Everybody's on the same thing. So
what if they say why? What do you say?
Why? Because music is a language and you have to understand how it works. Like to some
but
degree.
What if they said, well, I could listen to it and just figure it out faster than you or whatever. You know what I mean? What if they
faster than me? You are not smarter than me.
But you know what I mean? Like if they're like, well, I could just learn it. I mean, why do I need to do it? So what's your good explanation for? Because I guess what I'm leading at is I see it as a great, if when you have a student that's questioning something, that means maybe they actually care, right? So
exactly.
So they're saying, well, I don't understand why this is important. And if you can only say, well, just because music's like that, that's how music is. Well, that's not an answer. That's not a very good answer, very useful.
That's for the quote unquote authoritarian aspect of some teaching styles that comes into play, where it's just like it's just the way it is, just do it. Segovia was like that, at least from everything that I've read. He would basically like berate you if you didn't do it his way. I
can't imagine he had a lot of beginner students though.
Yeah, but even then, for an advanced level guy. Like I think it was an article by John Williams was being interviewed, and he was like, Segovia was at times like almost downright abusive towards the students, which I could get because it's old school. Like back then, it was really old school, right. And for better or for worse, it's like Adam Holzman, classical guitarist. And had a lesson with Segovia, and he plays very unorthodox. Like instead of like a footstool and everything kind of set up upright, he puts it across both legs, horizontal. This weird finger technique, great tone, great player, but way outside of the box. And like Segovia just couldn't get over that. And it was just like, even though his playing was great, he was just blah, 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 with everything else. And it's like, well, I get both sides of the point, but I'm also in the thing of like, he's playing great, so who cares? Like ideally, I'd like the X setup, but it's working for him right now, and it's not hindering anything. And I don't see anything where it could potentially hinder things in injury type of way. Then okay. And I also subscribe to the whole mentality of the reason why classical players sit a certain way is because it's ergonomically good and will help for the long run, which. Right. It was vindicated by Steve Vai in that video about his hand thing. He's like, I'm not holding my guitar like a classical and so on because I screwed up my hands because they're holding it the wrong way and holding chords too long and so on. And I'm like, ha! I literally sent that video to every single one of my college students and being like, this is why I hound you to sit right now.
You never do that to me though. What's going on?
Well, because you're set in your ways.
I don't mind sitting like that, but it's like, and actually it's easier in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
There's
Oh,
certain things are not easier, but most things are. But it's just not convenient, Adam.
no, I find it very. I sit that way generally all the time, and I was on a big footstool kick for like the last 2-3 months, but I honestly I had to switch back to my ergo play because my sciatica started to kick
I
in.
also don't like sometimes when the neck, this part of the neck can be kind of far away.
See,
Where like here it's like the farthest away it is, like I could grab it with my teeth. But when
well,
you're here, it's like it would take quite the stretch.
the teeth playing kind of gets tricky there. So I'm sorry that happens, but to each their own in terms of the teeth playing. But I think that just to kind of harp on that one more time, like if somebody asked me, like, well, why do I need to? And that's the reason I'm bringing up that particular student is to answer that question because that's exactly what he said. It's like, well, why do I need to learn this thing? Like, why do I have to learn to read music? And like I get where he was coming from, and I basically said because music is a language, and this is the written thing that we use for it. We communicate this musically through it. Granted, it's sounded pitches, and you don't have to necessarily be literate to be able to speak English, and I get that. But understanding the rules behind it allows you to communicate on a much deeper level and more effectively across everybody that's out there. If like I write something out in music and everybody else understands what's going on with the music and can read it, they're all going to play it the same way. There's no ambiguity there. Whereas by ear, you can get close, and some people can get exact, obviously. But I think that like that is going to be more dependent on how everybody else's ears are trained versus the standard thing of like this is where the notes are and this is where you play them. This is what they sound like. Here you go and do it. So I think it takes a little bit out of the perfect pitch guys' hands and puts it more into the general populace.
Well, I think too, like it's one of those. If you wanted to be a good speaker, a good writer, in general, do you think that you would have better chance at that, like learning how to read and write, the learning English and how it looks on a page, where you could quickly process it, you could learn, it could improve the speed that you learn things, you can find stuff from different people that weren't just you, and everyone has some common language. I saw somebody wrote something about, as far as I think it was in that post, as far as communicating the idea of, well, why is it valuable to read music or treble clef? And he's like, it's kind of like if you were looking up recipes for cooking.
Yep.
And, one way is like, well, if you couldn't read the recipe, then you'd have to sit there and like memorize the amount of stuff people were putting in and when and how, and you'd have to like sit there and try to memorize it, and then hopefully you didn't make any mistakes, and maybe you made a little cheat sheet for yourself somehow in your own language, but then it's like it's only good for you even if you did that. But if you actually learned the language, not only would you be able to much more easily remember how they did it, you'd actually be able to go to the library and find thousands, millions more recipes if you wanted to, and so it's kind of, that was one of the things that kind of annoyed me, I think, about it too, is like, well, as far as learning how to read, that's an easy one. That's easy to conceptualize why it's important. It's not important because that's the way music is. Because the way that we write notation is, I don't want to say it's an accident, but
it's definitely changed and evolved.
But it could have been anything. It could have been any kind of picture. This is just what we landed on. This is just how humans decided to do it, and this is just the most popular version of it that transcended through versions. But there is a million ways you could have written music,
absolutely.
right?
I mean, that's the reason why tablature is still around.
Yeah.
And
tablature, it has value, right? And and even you could argue, probably the first, I'm certain if you went back to like what the first forms of notation were, they were probably effectively tablature. There's probably some instrument or whatever that lines up just right with the way this is, and it's like, well, yeah, you just take that and that tells you which fret to play or whatever. Like it would have been like an identical little map of how you did something, and like, okay, that makes sense. That's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the fifth. That's the fifth. It probably was literally that. And they're like, well, that note lasts a little longer, so let's make it look a little different. So I try to do, I think with my kids too. Sometimes they're like, because I have a 6 and a 10-year-old, right? And they're learning words, and sometimes English is a pain because the words just don't make any sense.
Yep.
The way they're like, well, how do you spell that? And like you tell them how to spell it, and they're like, what? Like, why would that doesn't
Pneumonia?
sound like? Yeah.
Starts with a what?
Yeah. That doesn't make any sense. And I'm just like, English is stupid. That's just like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
it is.
Sometimes it doesn't make sense, and you just have to remember it, and that's unfortunate. But it is what it is. So, and I think the same thing with notation. It's like I think it's a little more smarter than that, I guess, most of the time. But it's like, well, it's called A B C D E F. Well, some places call it do re mi fa sol la, and some places call it some other names. That's just a name, like it's just a label.
Yeah.
It's just for convenience. It's not set in rule. It's not like God said, this is a C, and it will be these frequencies only. And if you try to veer from this, you will be doomed. That didn't happen. We just called it something.
It make things interesting. It gives new things to the devil's interval.
Yeah, right. This will be the devil's interval. Yeah.
But no, exactly. And I think like it ended up, it's one of those things where it's like, it happens to be the most efficient thing that everybody came up with at the time with a limited scope that they had. And then somebody else just kept building on it and building on it.
In a prosperous part of the world too, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
It's not, we're talking about a really small geographical region of the planet.
Mm-hmm. And there's probably other ways in other cultures that dictate music in other notational ways that are very odd compared to ours, and that's fine, but it's the same results. It's just because a couple of thousand miles apart.
For whatever reason, yeah.
So
and some tuning systems are 12 equal distance, some are 16, some are 24 or whatever.
Yep.
And so they're gonna have different versions, whatever.
But the bottom line is that every single one of those systems develops in order to communicate an idea to the next person. And that, I think, is the value of learning to read the music. It just happens to be, you're in a Western society, so this is what we do. Yeah. You can go on the internet, you can grab tabs, that's fine. And one of the big things that this particular student that I had was having hurdles with was going into a sheet music or a style of reading versus the tablature. And he's like, why can't I just do it with tab? Like, that was the big question. He's like, I can tab this out. And I'm like, that would work, but then you're not thinking in notes anymore. You're thinking in positions on the guitar, which works for guitar. And a couple of comments were like, well, I don't want to be sitting here playing Bach. And I got that. And I'm like, I'm not here to force you to play Bach. That's not the point. My thing is that, one, we're in college. 2, you need to understand the musical language and how that works. And 3, there are great amounts of benefits for that. You just have to put the time in to learn it. I mean, that's literally it. All it comes down to is, I had another student just recently ask me, like, how long would it take me to learn this particular song? And, factoring in their learning and everything, I'm like, if you spend an hour with it a day, you could do it in a couple of weeks. Yeah. Like, no problem. But that's the thing. And like, I think that's where this particular quote
an hour a day.
Yeah,
you mean an hour a week, right?
No, I mean a day.
Like my hour here a week isn't enough practice.
When was the last time you practiced? Dude, you were there.
That's right.
That's such a great meme.
Yeah.
Such a disappointing meme, but such a great meme.
It's true. That's why.
Yeah, tell me about it. But anyways, though I will say most of my students now all of them are pretty good workers. Like, they all do that, which I totally like. And this kid got over the whole hurdle, like, after I ground him and had to come to talk, because the nice thing about being in college is it's great to just threaten the grades, to be blunt, and I don't do that maliciously. I do that to get the motivation out, and so far I haven't had it fail.
Yeah, like, it's one of those, it's sort of a tedious thing to learn Well, I don't think it's tedious at all to learn the treble clef. That's like a 10-minute lesson.
Yeah.
And it, yeah, maybe you have to practice it every once in a while and try to memorize it and whatever. But if you explain it well enough, like they're never going to forget it after that 10 minutes for the most part. Especially if they got nothing else but face out of it, and that the lines next to that is like
Exactly.
like they don't need anything else. They could generally, if you taught it well enough, they could figure it out from there. And that's an easy enough word to remember that it's more than likely they're going to remember it. If it's reinforced once a week.
Yeah.
So the treble clef thing, and just in general, is not. Now, learning the notes on the fretboard is a little more tedious, but I'm also of the high belief that it's something you can do in 1 week.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Totally.
And then even that, you don't even need 1 week. You really need an hour or two. The problem is you can't probably do it in the same hour. You probably need like 15 minutes today, 15 minutes tomorrow, 15 minutes next day. Just because, or 15 minutes now and then 15 minutes like in the afternoon or whatever. You need these little breaks, or your brain just can't process it quick enough.
Exactly. And that's one of the big things that I tell everybody is like, when you're first starting out, 20 minutes, like ish, have a goal of 20 minutes, and then call it for the day. Then do it the next day, because that day space and rest is hugely reinforcing. Like that rest period where your brain's just sitting there just doing its thing with everything you just practiced, and then you come back to it, is great. And then you can slowly speed it up. I think it was I read something where it was like the most that most people of super focused concentration that most people get is like 20 to 30-minute chunks.
Yeah,
and that's it.
That's probably like superstar level too.
Yeah, and that's like super focused, because I know with myself, I'm focused when I'm practicing, but it's rare where I can have that moment of like unbelievably laser pinpoint.
Yeah,
when it happens, but at the same time, sometimes it doesn't. Like generally, that will happen when I'm learning like a difficult passage. I'll just like laser beam that thing. And I'll maybe get 20 minutes out of it. And then it's like, okay, I need to kind of...
You like sit up and walk around for a minute. Yeah, right.
Yeah, just do something to kind of like get my mind off of that, to relax for a second and then go back at it. So to keep tying it with this thing, that other thing where he's talking about like this, when students start to question something along these lines, it usually means that they're going to quit, and then that's it. And I'm just like, yeah, maybe. The last thing that he says, where he's like, I hate to lose a student, but when their focus is better served going in another direction, that's better. And it's time to move on. And that I completely agree with. If music isn't your thing, clearly, I don't want to force somebody to do it.
Yeah, well, I have a little bit of trouble with that statement.
Like,
because you just said, like, if music isn't your thing, well... You saying, I'm picking you rhetorically here.
Yeah.
You saying that to understand music means understanding theory and reading notes or whatever, I would call BS on.
Okay.
It's like 1% of a million or something. It's like a tenth, such a small percentage of actually understanding music is the theory and the notation. It's a way we communicate. It's a way that we analyze the music. But there are plenty of great savant level musicians who didn't know those words and didn't know that theory, and they make the most amazing music. And I would argue know music way better than most of us will ever know.
Just out of curiosity, though, what savants? Like, can you name a few?
Well, there's people that like notoriously don't know like how to read and stuff like that. So a lot of the jazz guys like Wes Montgomery, Thelonious Monk. I'm
pretty sure Montgomery could read, if I was to remember from his bio.
He said he couldn't read.
Like maybe not sight read on the fly, but he could definitely read. I mean, he started out.
I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of those.
Because all that stuff, especially when he was educated, there was no tab in the books. Like
Yeah, well, because he played, but he would. So his dad was a big Charlie Christian fan, and it was like, if you can't play Charlie Christian, you don't play music, you know. So Wes went and learned it all off the records, and
Yeah.
he had a really good ear. Like that was part of his thing. Is like he'd figured a lot of stuff out, and he'd hear somebody play some stuff, but he was not like a theory nerd at all.
Oh yeah, I'm not
And
saying that.
what's interesting is that he played his big thing was like playing extensions on chords. You could really hear him playing 13ths and 11ths and 9ths, and he really like hang on those notes. But that's just because he liked the way they sounded. And
Mhm.
also interesting is he got to those notes in a really clever way, not like just like playing scales and landing on them. Like the lines got to those through harmony and arpeggiation and stuff. But
I get your point about like it's like a 1% potential thing or whichever.
well, I'm not saying it's not valuable. I'm a huge theory nerd.
No, get it. I get exactly where you're coming from. I'm not taking like a personal insult or anything like that.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of argument, to dive back in and push back a little bit, the savant stuff are they're using it, but they're not giving it names to an extent. Like they might not think like he uses the extensions, like you said, and he might not be consciously thinking of those particular extensions. And honestly, I don't think anybody's conscious to the degree of like acutely aware of what they're playing over top of things in the moment. Like, right, because I can't think of a time. Now, granted, I'm not as
Yes
huge.
and no. I mean, I think you could stop any good jazz musician right now and say they might not be thinking, "Oh, I'm playing the flat 9 or whatever," but if you stop them and said, "What are you playing?" they'd be like, "Oh, that's a flat 9."
Well, yeah. I mean, and
that's not just they might not know where their finger is, but you can hear it too. So it's like, I know I'm playing the flat 9 because I can hear it.
But again, that happens to be like the theoretical stuff gets tied in with that because otherwise they wouldn't be able to label it as a
well, or they could call it whatever they called it. That's the pink note, whatever they call it.
The pink note. They're what is that thing? Synesthesia. Yeah.
So, I always say that too. Like when I was teaching a lot with kids, I'm like, I realize it's don't worry that it's called B flat. Like it could have been called purple. It's just a name. It really doesn't matter. It's gonna come in use. It's gonna be useful later to call it B flat for a couple reasons. But today, we're not there yet. Right now it's just a label. So just accept it for what it is. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I guess the best music to me is art, and maybe not all music's art, but the art side of it has pretty much zero to do with anything that's ever been written about it. And I guess that's what I'm trying to harp on.
In the sort of the expressive things that happen in the moment. Like it
doesn't have to be moment. It could be composed or whatever. Even the stuff that's composed and written with theory and all that stuff, what makes it good art or not has nothing to do with what the theory says, or if somebody read the right note or something that's on the page or accidentally played the wrong one or whatever. None of that has anything to do with the end product. I mean, not anything, but has very little to do with whether it's good art or not.
Okay, that's what I was wondering what you meant by art, because I was like, I'm not getting it, but it's also late and maybe my brain just isn't.
I'm a little bit picky about the word art, so that's probably part of it.
Okay.
Like, not everything is art. Not every piece of music is art. Okay. In my opinion, not every picture somebody takes a picture of like a beautiful flower or a valley is art. Mm-hmm. There's other things that make it art, but we don't have to get into that. Anyway, music the great music is art, and it can affect you, and it has nothing to do with whether the guitars were in tune or not, or they used drums or were slapping pigs or something to make the sound. Whatever it was, it can be a very like wonderful experience or horrible experience or whatever the art invokes on you. And that has very little to do with how we've decided to want, tune our instruments and write the theory up for it and all these other things. That's a very secondary sort of thing.
Mhm.
And I think that can be proven pretty easily by all the, great microtonalism music. Other cultures that don't use the 12 equal temperament systems,
Mhm.
and we hear music that's beautiful and wonderful and can make you cry, that has none of the things that theory and Western theory
Yes.
and Treble stuff. And I know you're not saying that. I guess
No.
I'm just trying to highlight that all the theory and all these other things are really just a means for us to somehow compartmentalize the sort of things that we're hearing and make some sense of it. But
But that's
we were
again.
talking about it again, what you said earlier, which was, and we said this in our conversation, texting, which is that the theory follows the practice sort of thing.
Yeah,
Right?
theory, and that's exactly where I was going with what I was trying to rudely interject. Was
I
the
didn't let you. I rudely interjected your interjection.
with the same thing I was going to say. Dang, you improvisers get one up on us all the time. The whole point that I was pushing with that is that with that aspect of theory following practice, it's always like we have to, in one sense, name things in order to give it the ability of repeat functionality.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's the nice thing that's the great thing about the theoretical aspect is that once you can name those particular things, you can put that and give it an actual tool, and tell yourself like, oh, I want that hammer, which whatever that happens to be, like a 7 sharp 9 chord or whatever.
Yeah.
And that it's like then you can consistently pull those things out in the context that you want, and you can give it a little bit more definition. So it's always this balance, at least for myself. I think that obviously the improvisation and just playing the stupid instrument is almost, well, I'd say it was more valuable than the other thing, but that's also like a apples to oranges type of thing. Like they're both fruit. I don't know where I'm going with this analogy, so hopefully I pull this off. But they're both fruit, but one of them you might prefer to eat first or something. But you're gonna eat them both because you're hungry and have no allergies to it. There we go. That was stumbling down the stairs and landing on my feet, I think.
Well,
So,
I think I'm pretty sure you've been in like bands before where none of the other people read any music.
mhm.
Right?
Oh yeah, the first stuff was
And
always
you wrote songs, and maybe some of them were pretty good, or whatever. At least for the genre or whatever that you were in. And I've been in a few bands where no one read music, at all, that were amazing.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna leave the names out of this one. And it makes and we communicated in sort of a different notation, right? Because some of
Okay.
the things were tricky. I'm thinking of a particular band. Some of the things are tricky with odd time signatures and weird turnarounds, and it wasn't always the same, but it would be like dashes on a board. Like I could read music, but no one else could. So it didn't help me in that situation. So I was thinking about your student and this guy's student too. It's like, well, if I'm playing with a band and you're telling me that I should learn how to read music, but none of the people in the band read it, it doesn't help. And in that situation that I was in, nobody read it, so it really was useless in that
Yeah.
context. And if that was my only band, that was my only musical outlet, and it was one that did take up a lot of time, so it wasn't like, and it was gigging and recording and whatever. It's kind of like, well, okay, yeah, sure, that's gonna help me, So I think it's easy for me to relate to see like, well, because I feel like I've had this conversation a lot with really good musicians who didn't know theory, or at least the way we call it theory, and didn't know notation the way we use it, but were fantastic musicians and mostly better than so many like trained musicians I've met by a lot. So it's kind of, those are the people that's like, well, those are interesting conversations, and I think it's a good question too. They say, well, why would I even learn it?
But I would counterpoint that like right away with the first thing of imagine if everybody spoke the same language. Then how much quicker could you get things done? is the
Yeah.
first thing. It's like, rather than being like, well, it's this. Do you mean this? You mean like this? You mean like this? Okay. And then have, like, there's so many extra steps that needs to do that versus everybody is speaking something
Sure.
universal. And that, I mean, it goes without saying.
There's a lot of good arguments, I think, but it's still a good question.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one thing I noticed with people generally that are like that are really good musicians, they don't always see how limited they are.
Mhm.
They see it as a huge ocean of possibility, and they're saying, well, I'm not limited by theory, those kind of things. Like, I'm not limited by it. Because you get a lot of like people that took 1 year of theory or something, and a lot of those people really do get stuck, like in theory land, and they cannot get past it. And when I say theory land, I really mean like first year theory. Like, they really can't. They're like, well, the one chord always has to follow this way, and it has to be in this inversion, and has to. Yeah. It's like, well, that was, when you're a freshman in college or a senior in high school or something, like that might have been the thing you learned. And that was like primer course, right? But you hear people do that, right? And there's a lot of people that have had that experience, unfortunately.
There's nobody more arrogant than a first semester university student.
Yeah, right. Of course.
It's just like
it's like that Goodwill Hunting or whatever, when that guy's like trying to quote some author, and he's like, "Oh, you must be a first year grad student."
Yep.
Because
exactly.
You haven't read this other guy yet, so this is who you're quoting today, right? So you know everything. But anyway, I noticed that like a lot of times people in that situation, and it's not everyone, and there's a few people that can break through it, but they don't realize that like the tonality they're using or something is always the same.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, you don't even know it. And then when you play something else for them, they're like, well, that doesn't sound right, because they're only used to one thing, and they.
Yeah.
Whether that's good or bad, that's a whole other thing. But it's hard for them to even know how much more can be exposed to them, just through knowing. Like, I was playing you that thing the other day where I can play the flat 9 on a major 1 chord, and it's all because of the way you do it. But if you just play a flat 9 on a major 1, like at the end of a cadence, it sounds really bad. Like you just, but you have to, if you do it in a certain way, because of how the notes get there, then it sounds right.
Yep.
And those are those kind of like weird little things that are fun, and it'd be really hard to do that without some context. Mm-hmm. But it's possible, certainly. Or you could just hear somebody do it, and then you'd be like, oh, I heard Ida Nesson do this thing, and I took it off the record, and it sounded good with this F over F sharp, or whatever. Exactly. Like, okay.
I think the other thing that this guy is driving at is the implied lack of discipline of his student.
Oh yeah.
And that's like, that kind of necessarily is an interesting thing, because I never take. I've been teaching for like 20 years, something like that, and you never want to immediately default to they're lazy, like, and not being undisciplined. I never do that. I also know exactly how much work should go into certain levels of music. Like, I have that much experience. If you're like, this is not out of your reach. I'm literally asking for 20 minutes a day, and you're just not. Like, I'm like, stop the Netflix, or better yet, get Hulu and just practice during the ads, and you'll get your 20 minutes in, or whatever. But that's one of the things that I find where I kind of can sympathize with the teacher's aspect of that, because that's frustrating. Just do the work, and you're not going to have to worry about the whys to the same degree, because you're just going to have it. Right. And
it'll be revealed to you later.
Yeah, but in some regards, that is absolutely what has to happen. Like, listen, I could explain to you the theoretical reasons why, but you don't know it because you don't know any theory right now. So you're just going to have to deal with me pushing you on these certain directions to learn these things. Then we can talk in this way, and then you'll get it. Otherwise, I can't give you, considering it's constructed in this particular other language, I cannot reveal its secrets to you the same way and efficiently until you know these particular other things with that. And I'm not saying that they couldn't imitate what I was doing. Like I could play something and they can play it back type of thing, but that's not the point. I want to it, and when I'm teaching somebody, I want to give them that toolbox and establish like certain things in their playing that they can pull out to do whatever they want in their own way.
Right.
And when there's no way to get that explanation, it really is just it slows everything down to the nth degree. And that's where it's like, okay, I know this isn't fun, but if you do the work, it'll get there. And that part of that happens to be like just doing scales. Just this will build coordination. These are all the reasons why we're doing this in order to establish you at the next step of your playing. And you have to go through these steps. You're not going to get to here without this. It's not going to happen. And giving them the right aim to get to that point. And then it's just like, yes, sit there with the metronome and do it. There is no shortcut. Which kind of brings us back to like the first thing that I said. There's nobody in there that does things at a high level that doesn't constantly work hard. That's it. Like it just doesn't, it could be in the style of music that you absolutely hate and think is garbage. But I guarantee you that guy that's sitting at the top of that particular chart or whatever is always in the studio doing something.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what separates him from you.
Well, that was to your point about discipline or whatever. It's like, well, if a kid came in and they can play guitar and sing at the same time, they do not lack discipline. Because nearly every single person who picks up guitar, if they can even play a chord, if they ever make it that far, and they can maybe string a few together, it's hard to remember at some point because it was a while ago for us, but that is a huge hurdle to be able to sing and play at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. And that doesn't come just like, oh, this just worked out for me. Like that takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of like really sucking at it before you can actually pull it off to some reasonable amount, even if it's just switching between G and C chord or something. Mm-hmm. So that's where I was like, well, the kid obviously, I guess my impression of I'm reading into it maybe, it's like they don't lack discipline. That's not a problem. Like they don't lack passion for doing this because literally most people don't make it that far. Mm-hmm. They put some effort in. They put some blood, sweat, and tears into this already.
But that also goes a little bit to the thing of sometimes the beginnings come very naturally, and then you run into a little bit of a hurdle.
I don't think I've ever met not one person that got that naturally.
Well, the singing and the playing thing, that I don't know, but I'm more in the sense of like, what's the way to put it? It's very easy to be above beginner, but below intermediate on the guitar. Like in terms of
maybe.
Like
I guess it depends. Where do you want to draw that line?
Absolute pure skill level. That's it.
But I mean, like, is beginner just like? I mean, is that what you mean? Like someone who could
a lower intermediate thing, like beginner, absolute beginner. Obviously, there's nothing.
I mean, how many people do you know that have sort of played guitar for like 5 to 10 years? Who still can't switch between chords.
Yeah.
Like they're kind of like, all right, I know the A minor chord.
But that's a question of like, how did they play guitar for that 5 years?
Well, I know they're not playing a lot, but it's like they play, every couple of days for 10 minutes or whatever. And so over 5-10 years, they've probably got 1,000 some hours in,
like $1,000 that I get in 3 weeks or whatever.
Yeah, right. But I'm just saying, like, it's not like I'm trying. I don't have specific examples, but I do know people like this. They're like, oh yeah, I played, and I tried, but they still can't. Like, there's a guy I know, he's like, just get an F chord, like the F chord's a big deal, right? Remember, we all remember the F chord. Like that thing sucks.
First chord is a son of a bitch,
and it's like the worst one ever, in the worst spot ever too, right? And especially if your guitar's not set up.
Oh yeah, it's like get a running start to hopefully get your finger to stay on the strings.
And then you're like, wait, so you finally get that, and you're like, well, I gotta switch to this other chord and then switch back or something. It's like, it seems impossible. And a lot of times it goes with a B flat chord, which is another pain.
Yep.
Right? So you're like, oh geez, this is impossible. Yeah.
You know that thing where I told you to stay on your fingertip the whole time?
Yeah.
Now you have to break that in order to get that bar chord. Good luck.
But
But
anyway,
yeah,
like though beating those stages, like not most people don't get past that F B flat chord stage,
hmm
right? So then I guess I see this. I'm sort of assuming this kid has got past that and got past the next big thing, which was singing and playing some chords at the same time, which is whether he can sing good or not, just being able to coordinate all that.
yeah,
That's a tough skill.
that's the
All
coordination
to
thing.
say that like nobody gets to that stage just being like, "Oh, what's this thing? Huh? It's got
I
some.
think to an extent that
It's got some.
sometimes that does
If I
happen.
put this. Oh, I guess this note goes here, and then this note goes here. La, la, la. You know, like, I
Song
got
adds
it.
to it.
It's perfect. You know, like a week after finding a guitar.
Yeah.
No one does that. That takes probably
Hey, that
years to
August
get
Rush
there.
movie, that August Rush movie, that completely fictional thing, but whichever. Anyways,
But
no,
it takes
right.
years of practice to get to that. Years.
The playing and singing thing. I think my
Maybe
brother did it within a year, easily. Like, but he was a huge Beatles fanatic, so everything that he was doing was myself. I mean, I never got into the playing and singing thing till like at least 10 years into my playing, and that's because I never really wanted to sing. I didn't care. And then when I did, it was different.
I shouldn't have cared.
Maybe not. Um, so, anyways, to bring us back to this wonderful topic that we started out with and followed some great rabbit trails with, that is there. The other thing that we started harping on was the authoritarian style of teaching
Yeah.
versus more of a guiding hands type of thing. Like there's no such thing as a laissez-faire teaching style because that would be autodidact. It's like, duh. You're just going to learn it yourself from books.
Yeah.
But and both of us, it started significantly that way, which is interesting into itself. But the like
Probably not that uncommon on guitar, really.
yeah, I don't think it's that uncommon at all. But I think like the way that this particular thing came across was heavy on the you have to do it this way. This is the only way that needs to be done. And to separate the collegiate from my personal studio, like my private studio, and I totally teach it in two different ways. Like collegiate is more of that's nice. I don't care. You have to get these things done.
Yeah.
The private student is where do you want to go? I'll get you there. Sometimes you're just going to have to do what I tell you to do, but most of the time it's going to be a fun ride. So it will get. I saw that.
I'm just yeah.
It's like, well, I can't do it this way. Unfortunately, if you want it to sound like the album, you have to do it that way. Like if you don't care about having something a little bit thinned out texturally, yeah, play the D instead of a B minor because you can't get a particular bar chord, and it'll sound kind of close. You're not going to be exact, but it's passable of playing along with it. And so like, but I'm never in my private students being like, absolutely, if you don't do it my way, I don't want you as a student. Like that, I can't see that ever really happening.
Well, so
There's a radical departure on sometimes.
yeah, I also think even at the collegiate level, I guess I'm curious how you take this. Classical is a little different too. Like, so this was a jazz teacher, so it's also different. But or I like to think it's different in some ways. How often do you follow the player, the student's muse? So, for instance, do you say, well, you have to play these studies? Studies are a hard one. Let's say pieces, because studies are intentionally made. Like you like I'm assuming that you say, hey, your tremolo is not very good. I
Yeah.
have this study, you should try it. It's going
Mm-hmm.
to help you work through that. Or you're not getting this certain kind of fingering thing. I got an etude, play this etude 100 times, and like we're going to sort that thing out. Like that's
Yep.
what those are made for. So that's what I'm trying to say. Those are like specific study tools. But as far as the pieces, they say, well, I don't really like Baroque, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my thing. I really rather do a contemporary piece or something, or whatever or I only like Baroque and I really don't want to do a contemporary piece.
That's more me. But
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. So, do you allow students to follow that muse and just see where it goes, even in college?
Yeah, to an extent, absolutely. But that I will put one asterisk on that, like everything else. I'll generally let them dive into wherever they want to go, unless I think the piece is like way out of reach for them. It's like, yeah, no,
sure.
we're not going to get anywhere with this. But
I want to do Rachmaninoff. Day
yeah.
one.
Well, like this last semester, I had a kid. He's been playing for a year. All right, and to put it in perspective, he's been working his butt off, and he's like, I want to do something like fingerstyle type of thing. And he was into Mike Daw, Annie McKee, those type of guys. And I'm like, I don't know with that level of playing, and considering where he started from. So we went through, and I have a huge extended catalog of Michael Hedges stuff, and I was like, well, what about Ragamuffin? What about that one? And I'm like, because I knew it was it was a reach. It wasn't a tippy toe reach, but it's like you're gonna have to stretch a little bit to get there.
Yeah,
it's not like a small step. And I was keeping an eye on him during the entire semester to see if I needed to quickly switch modes because he needed to get a jury thing set, and this is what he was going to do with a jury. And the last thing I want to do is give a student a piece that's so difficult that they embarrass themselves.
Yeah,
because that's on me then. So I was tracking him during the semester, and he did great. I mean, like this kid busted his butt on this because it was going to take some work. I knew he was capable, but I'm like, this is going to take some chops and some serious dedication. And he did it, nailed it, played it in the jury. He actually cut his finger on the string, like during the jury performance. And so he
had blood and everything squirting.
Yeah, it's like, that's how it's done, brother. That is how it is. He did great.
Was everyone else in the jury thing? Were they all guitar players or the judge?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you mean in terms of the judges? I guess you could say. No, it was me, the other guitar teacher, and I think an ethnomusicologist, and I don't know what's the other gentleman what department.
I was kind of hoping it was like a wind instrument person or something. They're like, oh, that's why I don't play guitar.
I mean, you couldn't really see. There was like no blood or anything on stage. I came out to let the next student in, and he was out there. He's like, yeah, I cut my finger, and it's like bleeding. I'm like, that's commitment right there. That's some rock. Way to go, man. And he did great, like absolutely fantastic. But
see, what you did there though too is, and I'm assuming you at least insinuated this, which was, I see where you want to go. We're gonna have to step here first.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still gonna be a step, but like, come on, let's do this, and then maybe we can do this one, and then maybe we do this one, and then we'll be ready to do that. So you were still taking their like inspiration and working with it.
Absolutely.
My impression from this post was, well, I don't really care what you like.
Not just that I take great umbrage with it.
What I care is, this is good musicianship. This is not. This is good writing. This is not. This is good jazz playing. This is not. And like that I have a hard time with.
No, and I agree. I mean, when I remember distinctly when I was studying in my undergrad, there was a Giuliani piece, variations on a cabbage farmer's son.
On a cabbage farm, is that what you said?
Theme and variations based off of the cabbage farmer's son, which is like some other like opera thing back then. I don't know. I hated the damn piece. I hated it. I did not like it. I didn't like that particular thing. And I just remember saying,
I think I remember disliking the Giuliani piece too.
Yeah. And Steve,
not a huge fan.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not a huge fan of Giuliani. His method books are phenomenal, but in terms of the writing, not a big fan. Regardless, I remember saying that to Steve. I was like, I just don't like this piece, and he's like, I don't care. Like literally, he's like, I don't care, play it. And God, And
what he was preparing you for though was that, like you were saying a couple episodes ago, I think, was you should learn the pieces that your students are playing.
Yeah.
And you might have a student that's like a Giuliani freak someday.
Oh,
and it's like, well, then like I probably should learn it, and I should not have an attitude about it, right? So That's
We got smacked out of the attitude, but
yeah.
I learned the piece end to end. And the thing that was funny is I was playing for another guy, and he's like, "Man, you should stick with Giuliani." He's like, "You play that so well," and I'm like, "You basically just stabbed me in the heart, dude. What are you doing to me?"
Steve, don't you think you should do another one?
It's like, nope. As soon as I could not play Giuliani, I immediately ran away from it. Though I find myself now going through most of his method books, like just in terms of getting more pedagogical feedback and refreshing myself with that. Because he's a great pedagogue. Like he had incredible ideas and there's a reason why we do that. His compositional pieces I might not like, but that's not what I'm using them for.
Right.
So yeah, I'll always kind of use this, even in a collegiate level, I'll use the stepping stones to get to where someone wants to be. Like one student was interested in Mysterious Habitats by Dusan Bogdanovich, and I was like, you're not there yet. Like that, I was like, no, not going to happen. Yeah. Let's go with something else by somebody else. Or not that it's not going to happen. They were more than capable of doing it, but where they brought it up in the semester was like, there's no way. No way. That, and it's like the reading was good, but what he does with all the mixed meter stuff and polyrhythms and everything else going on, it's like, yeah, let's just make sure we can count in four before we start doing stuff like that. And then in the back of my head, I was like, oh my God, I sound exactly like Steve, because he said that verbatim to me. And I was interested in it, and it's like, well, all right, but he was right. So whichever, sitting on this end of the thing. So
yeah, I guess the question becomes, if you were bold enough to say, but why? Why do I have to do that? And I like to think that Steve would say, have a good reason, and not just because I told you so.
It all depends on the mood.
Yeah, no, right. No, I agree, but yeah.
And that would be my thing too. It's like I'm generally pretty quick to answer those questions, but if I haven't gotten my coffee or if I'm hungry or whatever, you ask me that, and I'm going to be a little bit more succinct in my answer, more of the fist rather than the glove type of thing. But yeah, just anyways. So that his whole thing about letting a student go where their focus would be better used elsewhere, I could get that. I mean, there's definitely some students I hate to see go, and other ones where it's like, okay,
Well, how about that too? Like to be honest, as a teacher, to say sometimes,
this is not your thing.
I am not the right teacher for this person.
Oh,
I appreciate the income, but they should be studying with someone else.
Yeah,
I think most teachers, it's hard to be a teacher for a long time and not do that.
I think that's just an ethical thing that you do.
Yeah.
You realize that something is not working, and at this point, doing it for so long, I can clearly tell when it's not coming together.
And you've referred people to people, and people have referred people to you, and it just becomes this community, which is you need that as a teacher anyway.
Absolutely. There should be this handoff thing, because you can learn something from everybody if you're a good student.
Right.
It's a both and. A good teacher and a good student will work out great. Right. That's always the benefit with that. So anyways, so that kind of sums up all the point that I think this guy had in the quote there. Yeah,
I guess I do want to say, as much as I think like questioning everything is important, and that's just who I am, I guess. And I feel like my best students I've ever had question everything.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I'm going to say in more creative type playing, like with improvisation and writing and composing and stuff. They should be questioning it. But nothing's worse than having a teacher that never gives you like a hard time, in a way. Like you need somebody, like I feel like when I've paid teachers, whether it was in college or private lessons, and they're just like, oh yeah, that sounded good. I'm like, well, that's not why I'm paying you. I'm paying you to be like, okay, that sounded pretty good, but you really are always rushing that thing on the 2, and you're not doing this, you're not doing that, and like, I'll help you get through those things, but it's gonna suck, and you're gonna just have to bear with me. But like, it should be I want like that's what you're paying for as a student. I
You're,
mean,
you're paying to get, like, for myself, it's like I'm paying you to tear me apart so I can get
right.
better. Like,
I
I don't
feel
want.
like I'm not as good as I want to be,
Hmm.
so I need somebody to tell me. I was listening to Scott Henderson talk,
Hmm.
and he teaches, and he's like, I have a ton of students now because like with COVID and stuff, and he's
Yeah.
not touring or whatever. And he's like, people, what did he say? He's like, people will say, hey, I want you to listen to me and tell me what I need to work on, and then he'll say, well, what do you think you need to work on? And he's like, they're usually right. It's like, whatever they think they need to work on is what they do, but they're just looking for someone else to corroborate it and be like, and say, yeah, your timing isn't that great, and you're not doing this right, or you're not doing that right, or it'd really be easier if you did it this way. I see where you're at, and then what they're hoping, the other thing is, I'm a good teacher, so I'm going to be able to help you get
Hmm.
through those issues, right? So
Hmm.
yes, you're right in your analysis. I've corroborated that, and yeah, you suck. Let's get past it. We'll fix it.
Exactly. And I totally agree. Like with the questions, like good questions are the sign of somebody that's aiming somewhere. There are less than ideal questions in certain contexts, but fundamentally, if they're curious to find out the hows and the whys, it's like great, they actually care.
Sure.
Versus I think this guy was taking it more like the kid was complaining when he was saying why, rather than maybe legitimately asking
Right.
why. You know,
Well, and
and that.
some people just question everything. Like I'm definitely that. I do it all the time at work. I do it to my family. I annoy the hell out of everyone. And I always say, well, why this? Why that? Why that? How about this? How about it? Did you think about doing it this way? How about this way? How about this way? We turn it around this way. What if we did it completely different than this? And they're just like, oh my God, just stop. But that's me. So I'm sensitive to that maybe, where I know there's maybe more people are more likely to never question, and that's also a sort of dangerous thing, I think.
Yeah,
So,
oh, totally.
depending on the personality, right? If the personality is they don't generally question, but then they start asking like stupid questions, kind of, then you're like, all right, well, where's this going? But if
Yeah,
they're the
there's.
kind of person who's like, well, like me, they're like, well, why do we use notation? Why is it there? How did we put it on these lines? Why is there 5 lines? Why isn't there 6? Like, why did we transpose the different instruments and blah 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 blah? Like you could go on and on and on. Like I've definitely asked those questions.
Yeah,
And
and those are all the what was I had something brilliant and I lost it. No, there it was. You remember when we did those
now it
that
better be brilliant.
the no the what?
I
Oh
said now
no.
it better be brilliant.
Yeah, dang it. And that countdown threw me off. You're still in my groove here. But no, seriously, you remember when we did those that whole thing about like musical personality tests and like what fits the thing? We
Oh yeah.
both thought of the debater in terms of
Oh
that.
right. Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I get that. I do the same thing. I just constantly pick and pick and pick and pick and
Sure.
pick and pick because I want to know. It's like, and I want the best option to be on the table. So, and that's also something that can cause a bit of a standstill because you keep coming at it from different angles.
Oh yeah. Right.
Action aspect never happens.
Oh yeah. There's
And,
definitely times where I'm like, I wish I could just not question and
mhm.
follow a singular path, whether it's right or wrong. Just be like,
Yeah, oh,
well, every
exactly.
time I get to this chord, I always do one of these 5 things, or something. And I can't do it because of my personality. But I'm like, that would be way easier and it would solve a million problems.
Yeah, tell me
Uh,
about it. I'd get a lot more done.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's way
but
more efficient, no doubt.
yep, absolutely more efficient. But ultimately, you find your groove and you just tend to stick with it in terms of personality for as best as you can. Um, there was also that Tom Quayle thing, but we should save that topic for another one because we've milked this one pretty hard.
Oh yeah, sure. Which one was that one again? We
The
could leave the people wanting.
Yeah,
So
there's
my buddy has the Streetwise guitar, and he interviewed Tom Quayle. Oh, it was about
the level of playing and how
the
high
level, yeah,
and
like the
bass.
level of guitar playing, particularly in jazz, is gotten to such a high level now. He compared it
And that.
to like physicists who graduate from MIT, but only a certain handful of those physicists with PhDs from MIT can even get a job at CERN.
Mhm.
Is the equivalent of like the Rosenwinkels and stuff that play, that are the cream of the crop of jazz guitar, and that everyone basically at jazz school like thinks they can get to that level, but like it's almost like unattainable. It's like unattainium at this point, because
Yep.
it's not just about being able to play this stuff. It's but like these people are creators and innovators, and it never stops. Like every day they're innovating and they're coming out with something new, and you can't even keep up. So anyway, we'll talk about that later. But
Yeah, I think that'd be a good topic for the next one.
so stay tuned.
Stay tuned. The next thing, the state of modern fusion. Oh no, that's actually the old other podcast one. We can't rip off the name there, but we can definitely leap off of that whole assessment with thing, because I think that's a
That was cool. It was a very great interview.
that was pretty cool. So maybe someday we'll have him on.
Sure.
That would be great. All right. Well, everybody, we have gotten our weekly time in. This has been a fun and lively conversation.
Yeah.
So
We'll see you next time.
I'm sitting on my hands not to get in the Tom Quayle thing. And we will catch you all next week.
Peace.